So I'm going to show you how to create a monochromatic black and white value scale using tempera paint. So the first thing I do is I only use black and white. I pour out the tiniest bit of black because a little bit goes a long way. And when I work with my palette, I try to work in the corner of the palette because I don't want to waste all my paper. So by working in the corner, I keep more of my paper clean. So I put my colors that I'm going to be mixing together really closely together. And so I obviously pour out a little bit more white than black because you want more of the lighter color because it kind of gets sucked into the darker color. And so I was just showing there that on my value scale, I put the light sides on the left. Kind of helps students remember better, light left. And what I do is I show my students how to make piles so that all my white or all my black doesn't get messy. So I move all of my white that I need for the moment into its own pile, and I get the tiniest touch of black. And for my first value, I don't want it to be pure white because otherwise, I would just put white in that spot. So that very first key of the values, it's going to be the lightest gray possible. Monochromatic, black and white, I'm only working light to dark, just black and white. So I've put there right under the first one, white with a touch of black, just so that my students know kind of what it needs to look like, so that I don't get any that are just pure white. So I actually go back into the original pile because I might could use some paint that I just mixed before that could go into it. Now I like also doing it in a pile where I can still see a little bit of the original color, or value in this case, because it lets me see that I'm not getting too dark. I can have something to compare it to. And something else I like to do that I'm just doing here is I put a little dot next to what I'm trying to make, and then it lets me see more clearly when they're closer together you can compare them. And this is always sort of our exercise after we do our color wheel. We create a color wheel using red, blue, yellow. And then that's how we mix things like the secondary colors and intermediate colors. And then we do these scales. And these are meant to kind of help students get clean with their brush, use enough paint. At this point, I believe I changed my brush size because the other one was just too big, and you can see I was getting kind of messy with it. So something good to teach students. If your brush size just isn't working, if it's getting super messy, you may just need to get a smaller one. So I think here you can see I got way too dark, way too fast. So something else that I teach students to do, say that they just cannot make a color lighter, right? They keep adding yellow or they keep adding white and it's just not lightening up because it's too dark. Something I teach them to do is scoop what you've made into a new pile and then add light to that. Now I really try to teach them that adding light to dark does not work very well. But if you create its own pile, then it works a little bit better. So I'm realizing, okay, I just need a little bit more from that pile I had. It is a little bit too close to the second color value in this case. And I try to show them how to really kind of outline the edges. We talk a lot about how painting is kind of like cross-hatching when we did drawing. So in my visual arts class, this is what this is for, but you could use it for really any class. We do drawing before we do painting, so it kind of leads in that way. And with drawing, we talk about hatching and cross-hatching and how that really kind of covers up your values and how it kind of fills more space. And so we talk a lot about how when you're painting, it's really great to teach students to try to paint in one direction, especially when they're very little. But as they get older, it's really helpful for them to understand that, you have to cover space. So painting in one direction, and once you've gone in that direction, painting in the next one, it can really help cover it. So for example, you can see in the third key, it got a little streaky going vertically for me. I think that I don't know, I think that I just didn't have enough paint mixed up. And so I would need to go back later and kind of clean that up, and I would do it by going the opposite way. I really love doing these scales and these color wheels and all of these sort of exercises with my students because, I think they're a really low stakes way to help students get ready with the media and get comfortable. We always do this before we do any projects. It helps us understand how to save supplies, how to take time. We can kind of fix craftsmanship issues and just literally technique, how to hold a brush, how to know you have enough paint before we get to the final project. So in this example, you can see how I really used cross hatching really well. Went up, I went down. So I do grade these. I grade these, I grade color wheels. I really grade everything in my class. We really don't do much that's not for a grade. And so when I'm grading these, I'm looking for requirements like craftsmanship, obviously. For the sake of a video, I'm going a lot faster than I would on my own, and I tell my students that even when I'm demoing. I always tell them I'm a little uncomfortable right now with how quickly I'm going because this is not how fast I paint on my own. I really take my time. So mine could be a little cleaner, I know. So you can see here I've started making more piles. I'm kind of adding more to the pile. We also talk about another requirement besides craftsmanship, having enough paint on your key, it not looking too streaky, staying inside the boxes. The thing I care more about, even more than that, is just them seeing different values. So understanding how to get a darker value, how to get a lighter value. Here is a great example of, they look way too similar, obviously. It looked like it could work when I put the dot above it, but clearly it's the same. So I'm adding a little bit more dark. But I really want them to be able to see, the change, that gradual transition between values. Because this all serves them later when they're starting to paint with other materials or when they're starting to paint things like portraits or landscapes. Understanding how value makes things look more realistic, how it affects your composition, and how it changes color. So when I'm looking for requirements, I'm looking that there's not a really kind of abrupt change. I personally think that my third and fourth blocks are a little bit too different. I think that everything felt really kind of a nice transition until the third and fourth. So if I were grading myself, I may go back to the third and fourth and I may try to maybe slightly darken the third, slightly darken the second, so that it all feels like it transitions well. But again, they're just learning how to mix values. I talk a lot about how when we use our brush and when we mix, making sure that you really gently scoop, that you use the back, the front. I guess there's not a back and front to your brush, but kind of lay it on the back, kind of lay it on the other side. We talk a lot about how we don't scrub our brush into the paper because that'll ruin your brush, that'll tear a hole in the paper, you'll waste paint. So I talk a lot about how, even you can see there, how a brush is sort of like a broom on a floor if you're sweeping. We don't scrub a broom into the floor when we sweep. We very gently kind of glide the broom across the floor so that we can sweep all the trash in an area where we want it. And that's what you're doing with the paint. You're scooping it and you're sweeping it all into a place where you want it. And if it looks swirly and marbly on the brush and in the pile, then it's going to look that way on the paper where you're putting it. So making sure, and that's why I even like to move to a new spot on the paper, that it's really homogenized, that it's really mixed well together and blended. So this is the last value, and I talked to them about how, it's not pure black. You can see that I wrote black with a touch of white. I got really outside my box on that one. But again, I'm just really more looking for them showing me the change in values. I'd almost rather students use more paint during this task than less paint, because then they know that they're getting a proper layer. And so I'm just putting that dot there just to kind of show, comparing. And so that's the final scale from light to dark.